It is my pleasure to introduce you to Isabel Maria de Aguila from LOCAC, who will be teaching a class on Spanish women's headwear.
Hola, welcome to this class. We are looking at what Spanish women of the nobility wear on their heads in basically portraiture. We have 7 different categories of headwear that we're going to look at today, and we will be discussing each one, looking at what we can see in portraiture, what we can see from other resources, and then where I have examples, I'll do a quick discussion about my recreation of them as well. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them as we go for each particular style of headwear, and then there should be some time at the end as well. So with no further ado, how about we get into the PowerPoint. So I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, what's happening here? There we go. So, a survey of late 16th century Spanish headwear. That's just one of my Gura sitting there. Oh, come on, why are we not progressing? There we go. So yes, we will be looking at examples of different headwear, and we will be looking at adapting them to the SCA, because on at least one occasion there is a consideration for where sumptuary laws might be an issue. So if we look at these styles, as I mentioned, there are 7 different types that we're going to look at. I haven't included the 8th one, that is that delightful mad hat that is most closely associated with the Basque region, because I haven't looked at it yet. But the one that I have looked at the most is, of course, the Gura. This is the iconic Spanish hat. And we see it so often in the portraits of the nobility. I have run across online a lot of people interpreting it as wool, and that is very probable. However, we do have 2 instances of such hats being described as velvet. There is one in an inventory in Valladolid in 1589 that was described as being black velvet Gura, ornamented with 13 gold units displaying emeralds, a fine ruby, a white stone, and coloured stone cameos, and it goes on to describe the rest of the ornamentation. That one is described in Jewels in Spain by Priscilla E. Muller. And then we also have another hat, slightly earlier in 1543, with Maria of Portugal, chose for her formal entry into Salamanca as Philip II's bride was a jewelled grey velvet cap or Gura with a grey and white aigrette in it. Now, an aigrette is this. It is the jewel that holds the feathers that decorate the hat. And as you can see from this picture of Anne of Austria, this is a fairly typical Gura. It's got this black base with a very small brim, some seriously elaborate adornment to it, and the feathers on the higher side. In most cases, it's worn over cross plaits. But if we have a look at my one, I actually managed to find a hat pin today, so it shouldn't have fallen off. You can see that it is just a round shape. It has a soft brim, and it has, oh, hang on, where's the light here? There we go. You can see there are a number of padded pleats right around the outside. So the top is made from just a large circle, and it is pleated into the band. Well, there isn't actually a band here, it's just straight into the brim. And what I've done in order to maintain this shape is I have a structure underneath it. This particular one was made from what I could find at the time in about 2003, which was latch hook canvas. But you could use buckram. I have used cardboard subsequently, pasteboard. I've used even just canvas that I have quilted together. I guess pad stitching would be the way to do it by hand, but I was lazy and used a machine. And they all maintain the structure quite nicely. What I wanted to make sure was that my hat looked plush. So I have padded each one of these individual pleats with a small roll of of wool felt. So there's a little triangle of felt that is rolled up from the fat end to the narrow end and inserted into each one of these cartridge pleats before I sewed on the brim. So they are attached both at the inside to the silk lining and also on the outer edge of the of each roll there. And then I've just got a simple hat band around the edge. Because I wasn't nobility, wasn't royal, I didn't want to put too much of an ostentatious hat band on my hat. So I went with the simple row of pearls interspersed with small metallic spaces. And at the other end, I had a brooch that was gifted to me at Penzic, I think, back in 2003. And so I used that as my aigrette to hold my feathers in place. These days, I don't think I would be so careful about whether or not I needed to minimize my jewelry. I think I would probably just go for the most ostentatious display of pearls and gold and bling that I could possibly get away with, because that's how I roll these days. Also, I'm in Lockhart and we don't have any sumptuary laws. My favorite source for these is paintings. There are so many wonderful paintings that show these kinds of gura. And with the recent freeing up of museums and their digital images, we're getting fantastic images that are in such detail that you can actually see exactly what you're looking at. So there is so much available for inspiration in those portraits. But the female dress in the Habsburg period is in this particular book here, Spanish Fashion. There are 2 volumes of this. The first volume is just an absolute treasure trove. And I will put those up onto the YouTube comments afterwards. One thing that you will see as this particular style of hat moves through and towards the end of the 16th century is we start to see the brim disappear and we lose the pleats. So we end up with a taller structure that is smooth-sided, and probably the most popular or the most common image is one of the infantas. Her name escapes me at the moment, but it's the one with Magdalena Ruiz in it as well, where she has her hand on Magdalena's head. That has a tall, almost pillbox style hat sitting behind her hair with the most magnificent hat band on it as well. So that is the first style of hat. And there is all sorts of information in Janet Arnold as well for how hats were constructed in the period. And that's very handy if you want to make one of these yourself. Additionally, there is a illustration-free piece of documentation on my website that I will put the link up for at the very end. So the second style of hat we have is the toca. And it's not actually a hat, it is a set of veils. And these ones were worn by married and widowed women. According to Spanish female dress, toca were worn only by married women. We can also see that these headdresses, which could be opaque or transparent, covered the head, the back of the neck, and the two ends, or the cabos, which hung down the front of the chest and were fastened by a brooch. And we can see that in this image here of one of Austria, both by Alonso Sanchez Coelho. Also, there's a second one coming. And let's have a look, where is it? There we go. In both these cases, playing around with these shapes, I highly recommend actually taking that brooch or that cameo and attaching it to your dress. I made the mistake of going outside with one of these where the brooch was not attached to my dress, and it caught a gust of wind and smacked me in the teeth. So not something I can really encourage. You can see the difference between these two styles. This is the same woman, and they are both painted by the same artist. But you can see one is covering the forehead and one is exposing more of the hair. Now, both of them have wee protuberances at the side, which are to cover the hair. And as a result, they are called Toccasta papos. And there are some questions about what these different styles mean. Are they just fashionable, or are they associated with widowhood? Suggestion was in the making and meaning of, I haven't written down the whole name of the book, that's a rookie mistake. It is one of the articles in this one. Describes that as a traditional pleated widow's cap, if we're looking at this one here with that wave that comes down over the eyebrows. So the question is whether or not that was exclusive to widows, or whether it was just a fashion choice between what a woman wanted to wear. Now, I am in the process of testing shapes here, but I have very handily packed everything away, and I'm not sure where I put it. All I have is the fabric that I have purchased, which is quite a diaphanous silk. There is a wonderful portrait of Anne of Austria, I believe, where you can see the texture of the cabos as they come across the front of the dress. So I went for a slightly more textured silk for when I make my one of these. I'm also trying to decide whether or not I want to go for the full princess layer buns at the side, since I've got the hair that can fill those, but we'll see what comes up with that. The third kind of hat, where are we, is a jeweled headband. Now, these are just straight up bling. And we don't know much about them. This is my page of notes for what has been said about them. Occasionally, we just get mentions of a precious metal headband. By looking at the portraits, it is quite clear that these are sometimes worn with a caul or a jeweled net, for example, that sits over the back of the head, but this isn't always the case. So it's just a matter of working out what your personal preference is in this case. Some of them, like the one we can see in this particular portrait, have a jewel and a pearl sitting in the center front part between the rolled hair. And that's just gorgeous, but I always wonder what that would feel like dancing, because it would just sit there bouncing every time you jumped, but maybe that's just me. When I wear a jeweled headband such as these, I have one that was purchased as a jeweled headband that has little loops at the end. Sometimes I put a bobby pin through it. Other times I actually tie a ribbon so that it will sit on my hair, and I can either stab these in to keep it in roughly the right place, or get the ribbons and tie them around and tie them back at the front. And you can see that there is something on this, sometimes you can see something that might be a little ribbon bow here, and I think that might be related to attaching this particular style of jeweled headband. The other thing I tend to do is, if this is looking a little sparse, is I will just grab whatever garganta I'm not wearing at the time and just put that on my head. And you can see this gorgeous one is made using the ouches from oh gosh, what's her name? Truly Hats. They are just absolutely stunning and do make a very substantial, quite hefty headband. So we tend to see these worn by the nobility. I haven't noticed them popping up in any other images, so I'm assuming that they have some sort of display of rank involved in their wearing. Right, following on, we can see what these jeweled headbands actually evolved into. And that is the Jolia. Now, I'm not sure if that is in fact the name of this magnificent tiara, or if that is the name of the hairstyle that goes with it.
We do have a question.
Oh, yes.
The Venetians were sewing their hair at this time. Would the Spanish sew their hair down with those jewels, maybe?
I'm going to say no, because sewing your hair down with a string of pearls is a freaking nightmare. By the time you start to get any tension on it, you're putting the string that the jewels are on under intense strain. However, I am firmly of the opinion that yes, they were sewing hair. They were just using a linen or a wool thread of some description that matched the hair.
Yeah, no, but like that little ribbon that you were pointing at would be very common for what they would do in Venice. So like put down the diadema and then sew around the diadema and the hair.
Yes, and in fact there is a hairstyle in Spain that shows beautifully matched ribbons coming into a V shape across the head. So we do know that they were sewing, but because we can't see the ribbon here, we can see the pearls. I'm inclined to think this is more in line with the invisible sewing style than the obvious ribbon sewing for these particular headdresses. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So those pearls could in fact be a rope of pearls that are just very carefully woven backwards and forwards and then caught with the hair sewing to make a pattern. But I suspect we'll never actually know for certain at this point.
This one in particular looks like a cap to me. There is some kind of crosswise net behind it, yep, and something solid on the top of the head. So it looks like a little, like a quarter melon slice kind of cap.
Yes. I'm not sure exactly what that is. I've played with the idea of a little hat that just sits on the back of the head, like almost a Juliet cap kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
It sits on top of it, but I don't know until we get more images or we find a resource that talks about it in a little bit more detail. I think if you come up with something that looks like that, run with it and tell me, because I'm really keen to learn more. Are there any more questions on the jeweled headband? Nope. Okay, so we'll move on to this one. So let's have a look. The texts of the period, so this is with, again, Spanish female dress by Bernice and Descalzo. describe how women used not only hair pieces, but also a wire support to create this very high-fronted hairstyle. And that support was called a jolia, which means literally a little cage. So I'm assuming there is some kind of support under the hair, which makes sense if you're then going to put some kind of tiara or jeweled, goodness knows what you would call this, actually on top of the hair. And you can see how this has developed from that earlier headband. And you've got, once again, the little pearl sitting where the center part would have previously been. Now, this particular portrait, it looks like there might be curls supported in an upwards direction, but I'm not entirely certain. But there is definitely some kind of structure going under this jeweled magnificence. The precious metal headband here was originally more of an arch shape like we saw, and it evolved into this pointy conical headdress where the number of jewels and feathers on it just exploded. So this is probably more in lines of a piece of jewelry than specifically a hat. The other fun point that goes with this is that this particular hairstyle with the high front on it was very much part of the identity of court ladies, to the point where even just a reference to high hair was enough to tell the reader or the viewer that this particular person was of very high social standing, or had a very high social status. And that's another point that is made in the Spanish female dress of the Habsburg period. Are there any questions about this one?
There's nothing in chat.
I just said that it reminded me of like the bumpets from like a decade or two ago.
Absolutely. And you can use those little bumpets very well for those slightly earlier hairstyles where you still had the part in the center and you had the significant volume just off the temples, like you see Anne of Austria wearing. And I suspect this is exactly the same, but for some reason they went with a more of a cage structure. The next one is the manto, and this is, oh, I love this. This I saw first in Algega. There are 7 different cutting diagrams in the 1589 edition of the book. And there are, I think it's the same 7 cutting diagrams in the 1580 edition. And the fact that there were 7 of them and a chunk of discussion about how to measure it on the lady indicates that these were quite a popular and almost necessary item of fashion. And we don't see many people wearing these as the subject of a portrait. It's hardly surprising. They obscure all of the riches of the person. But we do see quite often smaller figures in the backgrounds of the scenes. For example, you can see some in the maps from the Civitatis Orbis Terrarum. And there are a number of others, but their names escape me at the moment, I'm sorry. So there is a lot written about these particular garments, and they are really not popular with the moralists of the time. They seem obsessed with the possibility of women going out and meeting with people, that they are obscuring their identity and it's going to cause the downfall of civilization. One particular gentleman, I'm just trying to find, no, I can't find his name, describes that to veil oneself or to taparse is to hide one's face, the medio ojo, by folding and refolding the cloak so as to reveal only one of the eyes, which is always the left eye. And I think that is what is being depicted here in this image by Cesare Vitelio. This was a contemporary writer who's quoted in Daily Life in Spain. So clearly making a difference between being taparse and being cubrirse, which was to let the hood or the cloak to fall over one's face naturally and without affectation. One was modest and one was improper. And because of this fashion, a father no longer recognizes his daughter, nor a husband his wife, nor a brother his sister, as if that is the worst thing in the world. But the fact of the matter is, we don't actually have any information about how many women were out and about veiled like this. We don't know when women went out veiled like this. We don't know how regularly they went out veiled like this. Was it something that you did when you wanted a moment of anonymity? Was it the fact that you hadn't slept well and you were puffy-faced and didn't want to be seen in public? Or was it done when you were going to do something that was modest or personal, when you were going to, for example, mass in the morning? We don't really know at this point. I haven't run across any particularly detailed explanations of when, why, and how a woman would go out wearing this. We just know that they did. But as much as it did offer freedom of movement and a degree of anonymity, it also served a very, very equalizing purpose. That in the article Like a Portable House, The Culture of Tapado and the Politics of Anonymity by Carmen Peralta, she says, to cover oneself was thus a valuable ruse for many wives and daughters of impoverished hidalgos who lived under economic hardship, and because of that, could not appear in public with the due finery or exhibit the sartorial qualities expected of their noble condition. So it would have been unbecoming of their station to go out in clothing that was not fine fabrics, current fashion, just rich and sumptuous. So they were able to disguise the fact they weren't able to go out as befits their station by going out tapado or covered in this beautiful manto. So from that point of view, there was an equalizing opportunity. The other thing was, if you were covered wearing one of these mantles, you were automatically assumed to be of higher status. So it was another way to improve your status without necessarily having to spend huge quantities of money on your garments.
We have a question. What colors were the manto?
Well, the earlier ones and the ones worn by the Moorish population tended to be white. The ones that came along later tended to be black. I haven't seen anything other than black in the 16th century. But then, of course, our illustrations from the time tended to be painted with quite a lot of symbolism. So whether the colors that are depicted in the illustrations are actually representative of the colors that were worn, I don't know. But then we also look at Spanish fashion at the time, and black was the color. It was somber, it was rich, it was ostentatious without being ostentatious, really. So it wouldn't surprise me if black was the most common color.
And how transparent or opaque were they?
There is a patterned manto from the next century, I think, and it is quite opaque. It is quite heavy. They do tend to talk about them being made out of silk or wool, and if they are designed to operate as a modesty garment, it makes sense for them to be quite opaque. However, I found as a beginner practicing with them, they were quite disconcerting to walk around in. So when I made mine, my proper one, and I adapted it to the SCA, I chose to use linen voile. First off, it is light, it was available, and I could see through it just enough to see where I was putting my feet, particularly when I'm wearing chapines. So I have this, that when I hold it up here, I can actually read the slide through it. I added a narrow lace border to it, which is not mentioned in Alshaga, because on this particular image, we can see that there is a lace border on it. And I just felt it made the thing look a little bit more finished, a little bit more complete, so that it would look intentional and that I hadn't just wrapped myself in a random blanket.
And it would probably help it stay in place better, like give it a little bit of heft on the edge.
Not this particular lace, but what I have found is great with it is now I can tell when I'm holding the edge of it or holding part of the body that's just been folded over. So if it catches the breeze, I know what I've grabbed straight away. So that's one way I adapted that to the SCA, away from the expectation of modesty. But again, that was personal.
So the manto might not have been worn for sun protection the way that veiling was often done in Italy to preserve a skin tone or avoid burning.
I hadn't considered that, which is odd because I'm from New Zealand and we burn in 30 seconds down here. It could well have done. I simply don't know. Something to look into. My next one that I make, I'm wanting to make out of a tropical weight wool, perhaps, because I'm just over 5'9" tall. So if I make one that goes from my feet on one side, across my head, down to my feet on the other side, there is a lot of fabric involved, and that takes quite a lot of heft. And I want to keep things light and manageable because I'm not wearing these day in, day out. I'm not developing the skills, I'm not developing the muscles to manipulate them. So I want to keep things so that I can wear them and enjoy them when I'm at events. Right, moving on to the next one. So this is a Capilla di Camino. A capilla being a hood. Now there are no references whatsoever to these in Alshaga. There are very few depictions in art that I've managed to find. This is the best source I found so far. And I really do need to thank Maestra Beatriz Aloyes de la Hoya for putting me onto this on her wonderful website, The Spanish Seamstress, because they are just ridiculous and I love them. There are several conjectured recreations. Beatriz and Amanda Laporta both have done versions of this. And we simply don't know what they were in period. We've got this image where you can see that there are multiple colors. There's a small child wearing a blue one. There appears to be a purple one next to that. There are the two ladies in black who are wearing bizarre masks as well. The fact that everybody is walking indicates that there is a degree of ceremony to this particular image, but whether that affects what they're wearing, I don't know. So how I went about creating this was I got myself an apple and I started making paper patterns to see if I could get the right kind of shape between the curve at the top and the width of the face. And then I scaled it up for my head. And I ended up with this particular hood here. It sits quite flat. And I'm just going to put it on. I'm wearing the wrong hairstyle today. So I have a bun at the back rather than crossed plaits, but hopefully you can see that the shape is reminiscent of what you're seeing in the image. So this is I've just put this here, fleur-de-lis from my heraldry in a laurel, because it seemed like a convenient place to put it, frankly. I don't have any justification for that happening in period. This one is made out of a lovely, actually an almost boiled wool on the outside. I have a linen lining, and between the two I have a layer of canvas from memory, just to make sure that it was, it had body to it. I have reinforced the top with just a little bit of extra along the seam line here. So there is a seam and a seam. And I put a little bobble on the top because I thought it looked cute. No justification for that either. It is surprisingly comfortable. The only downside with wearing this is it really messes with your acoustics. You can't hear anything from beside or behind you, but everything that comes in front gets bounced with almost an echo at your ears. It's really weird, but you do get used to it quite quickly. If we look closely at the lady in front here, and I'm sorry for the quality of this image, it was the best I can find, there does appear to be a hood underneath it, or at least a linen layer. So I just got the same pattern, but instead of doing the hood, the point, I just gathered it in like you see on the standard embroidered coifs from England. So that just sits on my head underneath it. And then this just goes on top. Truth be told, I usually put them both on at the same time, just to make things easier. Now you'll see that the lady in the portrait, hers is sitting up quite high. I've always assumed that's because of the hairstyle. So usually when I wear this, I tend to have two fairly decent sized plaits crossing over the top of my head, and that gives exactly that, that lift that you're looking for from the portrait. Oh, and the other thing, they are incredibly warm. If you need to go to an outside event that's going to be a bit chilly, I cannot recommend these highly enough. A decent length hat pin, or even longer, that goes straight through the top and into your plaits, will hold it on in pretty much a gale, especially if you have sewn your plaits in place. They're a wonderful, wonderful look. Right, and that brings us on to our last style of headwear. Which is, of course, religious head coverings. The reason I have included nuns' headwear in this is because they were a surprisingly large portion of the population. A widowed woman had 3 options, as I've just learned from the class earlier this morning, in the 13th century anyway, was to join a convent, to remarry or to remain a widow. And joining a convent remains right through until the 17th century at least, a perfectly valid option. And as we can see here, we have the Infanta, Isabel Clara Eugenia, joining a convent and yet still acting as a regent, I believe, or at least having a lot to do with the governance of the Netherlands at the time. So the religious head coverings are a combination of two of the types of head coverings we've already looked at. The first layer is a toca, so a veil, and it is very, very fitted to the head. So where that last one we saw came round and down the front, it doesn't do that. It comes right round and under the chin, almost like the earlier period wimples that we tend to think of. So that one was very secure. It sat quite close to the head. Then on top of that, we had another toca that sat around and came down the front, and it usually covers the chest. There are different styles of the second toca. We can see one here that is square at the bottom, and you can see hints of folds, horizontal folds across it. So that was one of the styles that was large, it was squarish, and it was very clearly stored folded. And then when it was worn, those folds were preserved. The other style of of toca at this point, was one that came from the chin. So it didn't sit back from the throat, it was worn slightly further forward. And there were just pleats radiating out from the point of the chin. That tended to have a slightly more curved bottom. Don't quote me on that. And these pleats radiating out like sun rays from the face. And over top of these two layers of toca, we had a dark manto, as we can see the Infanta wearing here. And in fact, she has caught up one end of that enormous manto in her hand. And my favorite book for this is La Virgen de Luto y de Menteria de las Dolores Castellanas by Eduardo Fernandez Merino. The one problem with this book, and it's not really a problem with the book, it's a problem with me, is it is entirely in Spanish. And given that I barely speak a word of that, there is a lot of looking at the picture and then typing things into Google going on. But it is a fantastic resource if you speak Spanish. I'm sure you will find that to be an absolute gem. So there we have my introduction to the 7 different types of headwear that you would commonly see worn by the nobility or women of the nobility in the late 16th century. If you want to see what I do and the research that when I finish it, I put up on the website, please do head along to the House Amber Hearth website. My particular bit is www.isabelmaria.amberhearth.com. As a household, we also maintain a number of Pinterest boards, an Instagram account, and YouTube. Please come along, have a look, ask questions. You can always get hold of anybody from House Amber Hearth at amberhearth@gmail.com. And that brings us to the end of my class. Has anybody got any questions they would like to ask?
Margarita has a question about the headbands.
Yes.
Where do you get them?
The one I'm wearing at the moment, I got from a very cheap children's jewelry store, to be honest. It's just plastic pearls and plastic ouches that are threaded onto, in this case, nylon. This one, the ouches themselves come from Truly hats. The pearls and the spaces came from some kind of cannibalized piece of jewelry. And it's all threaded on, oh, I can't quite see it, but tiger tail. This one is another one that I made on tiger tail that came from destroying a series of very cheap metal elasticated bracelets. And again, pearls I stole off a $2 shop necklace. Oh, no. These are the last of my pearls from my last trip to LA. In 2003. So if you can find a jeweled headband, even one of these things, they will work perfectly. Otherwise, I just like to make them to fit as a necklace, and then they have that wee bit of a curve that fits really nicely on the head as well. The one that I've got under construction somewhere in my house, hidden away from my kitten, is actually sewn onto a base of a short length of a gold trim that I had, that I have attached to the last of my curved Peter shim. And I'm just sewing everything onto that. So it's going to be quite heavy, which means I might look at putting a velvet band on the underside of it with the velvet sitting down, so that that will grip my hair a little bit more and hopefully not move around so much. You could also, if you've got a caul of some sort or one of those pearl nets, you could certainly look at attaching your jewels or your filament, for the want of a better word, straight to your band on that too. How about I stop sharing that? Right. Oh, Eduardo, was that the that was La Virgen de Luto, Indumentaria de las Dolorosas Castellanas by Eduardo Fernandez Merino. I will put that up on the YouTube comments. They are, those headbands, faking them with modern things, are actually surprisingly easy to make. They look really complex. They have a huge payoff for the amount of effort you put into them, but they're just, yeah, sew some pretties onto a piece of fabric. I think that's, yeah, that was everything. Right. Well, thank you so much for coming along and allow me to rabbit on about my favorite Spanish headwear. Oh,
between
yeah, the triangles came from trial and error. I made rectangles and I just ended up with this ridge sitting here. So there was a flat top and a ridge and then points down. But with the triangle, the soften around the edge just, yeah, gave me the silhouette that I was looking for.
between your two classes now and the Braga's class with I think that was last night.
Yes.
I'm going to be very busy for the next several months.
Fantastic.
My poor fiance is not going to know what hit her bedroom with all the fabric everywhere.
Good luck with that. It's great fun. As to Magda, there is a piece of documentation up on my website. If you go into the, I think it's called documents link, down there will be something about a Spanish Gura. It's probably the bottom link from memory, because this is one of my oldest hats, that takes you through my thinking process and research at the time. I probably actually need to update that, but Maybe I'll look at making a new hat and document the process on YouTube or something.
Looks like that's the end of the questions in chat. You've got a couple of minutes before the next one, but thank you so much. This was an amazing class.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun getting ready for it. So good luck with your hats, everybody, and I shall leave you to your next class. Adios.